She was 12 years old, walking home, broad daylight, and then nothing. Her backpack was found standing upright in the woods, untouched. No footprints, no struggle, no trace. For 28 years, her mother begged for answers. And when the truth finally came, it was worse than anyone imagined. Before I begin, thank you for watching Minority Struggles. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? It really means a lot to know you're here with us. We're in this together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. The day Sharon Denise Brooks vanished started like any other. May 12, 1981. The air was heavy with Georgia heat, the kind that stuck to your throat and made your skin itch by noon. Patricia Brooks had braided her daughter's hair that morning with red yarn ties and reminded her not to forget her sketchbook. Sharon had been working on a drawing for the school's end-of-year art showcase, a picture of a willow tree with stars tucked into its branches. Sharon was 12, quiet, imaginative, always home before 5. By 4:45 that afternoon, Patricia had already started to worry. She kept glancing at the clock on the kitchen wall and pacing between the front porch and the window. When 5 o'clock came and went, she stood on the porch barefoot, the screen door creaking behind her, eyes locked on the bend in the road. At 5:12, she called the neighbor 3 houses down. No one had seen Sharon walk by. At 5:34, she called the school. A secretary told her Sharon had stayed a little late to finish her drawing, but left shortly after 4. At 6:10, Patricia was standing outside the school herself, her house shoes scraping the pavement as she called out her daughter's name. No answer, just wind and the faint hum of insects in the trees. By 6:30, she called the police. They arrived, asked basic questions, and wrote things down slowly. The young officer suggested maybe Sharon had wandered off. Maybe she was with a friend. Patricia stared at him until he looked down at his notepad and said he'd file a report. They didn't search the woods that night. Patricia stayed up, sitting on the porch with the porch light on, just in case. At sunrise, she put on her work shoes and walked the length of Sharon's route herself, from the school to Thornapple Road and into the trees behind the old rail line. That's where she found the backpack. It was sitting upright on the dirt path, just past the fork where Sharon sometimes cut through. The zipper was half open. Inside, her notebooks, 2 broken pencils, an eraser worn to the nub, and a sandwich wrapped in foil. The bread had started to dry out. Patricia picked it up slowly. Her hands were shaking. She handed it to the officers when they arrived. They logged it into evidence and told her to go home. She refused. Detective Carlos Wynn was assigned to the case. He was young then, barely 30, and already weary of the way some files got pushed to the back of the drawer. He treated the case seriously, but he was one of the few who did. The department had limited resources, and when no body turned up in the first week, the search began to fade. By week 2, the flyers were curling on telephone poles. The reward fund stopped growing. The television station ran a 5-second clip once, then nothing. Patricia noticed. She noticed how quickly the urgency disappeared. She noticed that when a white girl went missing 2 counties over that same summer, there were helicopters, dog teams, roadblocks. For Sharon, there was silence. But Patricia didn't stop. She kept Sharon's room untouched. She dusted her desk every week. She ironed her school blouse every August. She left a cupcake on the windowsill every birthday. Sometimes aunts found it. Sometimes they didn't. Detective Wynn followed every lead he could. One of the people he questioned was a man named Eugene Voss, a school contractor who'd been on site that week repairing pipes. Voss was quiet, lived alone in a trailer past Sycamore Hill. He said he'd finished early that day and went home. A neighbor vaguely remembered seeing him in his yard, fiddling with hoses. No witnesses, no vehicle, no record. He was odd, but not illegal. One wanted to dig deeper, but without cause, there was nothing to act on. So Voss stayed free. He went back to work. He aged. The town moved on, and Patricia stayed in the same house with the same light on every night. In the years that followed, Sharon became a name people didn't say out loud. A story kids weren't allowed to ask about. There were rumors, like there always are, but Patricia knew most people had simply stopped caring. By 2009, she was 62 and still setting the table for 2. She had one photo of Sharon framed in the kitchen, her daughter in a yellow dress holding a plastic trophy from the school science fair. That smile, Patricia said, was the last thing she saw every night before bed. That same year, Eugene Voss collapsed in a parking lot behind a grocery store. He was admitted to Dale County Medical and diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. He was transferred to a hospice facility a week later. By then, he was thin, pale, and silent for hours at a time. Until he wasn't. The nurses started logging strange behavior. He mumbled scripture with his eyes open. Sometimes he whispered things that didn't make sense. "She's still here," he said once. "She sleeps in the freezer when it's warm." A young nurse, Liza Donnell, asked who he was talking about. He looked at her and said, "The girl. The one I kept." She thought it was hallucination, until she mentioned it to her supervisor, who passed it to the administration, who forwarded it to the sheriff's office, who quietly filed it, until one name lit up the screen. Sharon Denise Brooks. Detective Lena Price had just taken over the cold case unit. She pulled the original file. Handwritten notes. A scanned photo of Sharon's backpack. A brief entry. Interviewed Eugene Voss, contractor. Nothing notable. She read it again. Then she called Carlos Wynn. He didn't hesitate. "I always knew it was him," he said. "I just couldn't prove it." They drove to the hospice the next morning. Voss was sitting up when they entered, eyes glazed, hands twitching. Lena introduced herself, but he didn't blink. Carlos set Sharon's photo on the tray table. Voss stared at it. "I know her," he said. Lena leaned forward. "Tell us how." She said she was scared. "God said I should keep her safe. He said take her in." Carlos's face darkened. "Gene, what did you do to Sharon?" Voss turned his head slowly, eyes glassy. "I ate her," he whispered. "Slow, like communion. That way, she'd never leave." No one spoke. The silence filled the room like smoke. Outside the window, it had started to rain. Inside, Patricia Brooks sat at home, her porch light glowing in the dusk, her hand resting on Sharon's drawing of a willow tree. Still waiting. Still hoping. Not knowing the truth had finally opened its mouth. The years did not pass quietly. They passed like rust spreads, slow, corrosive, and in plain sight. By 1982, Patricia Brooks stopped asking people if they'd heard anything. The eyes told her what she needed to know. They had forgotten. They had moved on. The sheriff's office filed Sharon's case into a gray drawer marked unresolved. They used words like unlikely recovery and low probability of closure. They used those words without ever saying her name. But Patricia said it. Every morning. Every night. She said it into the folds of Sharon's bedsheets when she made the bed. Into the folded socks no longer worn. Into the room she refused to repaint. She left Sharon's toothbrush untouched in a glass cup by the sink. She folded her school uniform every fall. And every May 12th, she left a cupcake in the front window and lit one candle. Most years, she blew it out herself. Other times, the candle just faded down into wax while she sat staring at the street. The world outside kept spinning. New neighbors moved in. New children were born and grew tall. A new principal came to Dale Ridge Elementary, then another after him. The local newspaper changed its font. The grocery store switched owners 3 times. But Patricia remained. The same front porch. The same porch light left on. The same quiet dinner for one. Detective Carlos Wynn kept the file in his desk drawer until his retirement. He said he never stopped thinking about it. He used to dream of Sharon's backpack, how neat it looked, how unbothered the ground was around it. He still felt the weight of Voss's interview, the hollowness of the answers, the lack of evidence. He carried the photo of Sharon with her trophy in his wallet long after his badge was turned in. And Eugene Voss? He aged. Quietly. The trailer behind Sycamore Hill never changed. Its siding cracked, its porch sagged, its windows yellowed. Voss became part of the landscape. Children were told to avoid his path. He never gave anyone reason to notice him again. He didn't have to. No one was looking. By 2009, Patricia was 62. Her knees had started to ache in the cold, and her left hand trembled when she wrote. But her eyes were still sharp. She still walked the same 3 blocks to the post office every week. She still left the porch light on. She still kept Sharon's room untouched. That spring, She returned from the post office to find a voicemail on her answering machine. It was Detective Lena Price. Lena had joined the Dale County Police 5 years earlier and had just taken over cold case reassignments. She had a background in forensic record analysis and spent most of her time scanning old files into digital archives. It was Sharon's file that stopped her mid-shift, not because of what was there, but because of what wasn't. The notes were thin. The timeline was scattered. There were only 3 pages on the only suspect ever interviewed, Gene Voss. Lena found it odd that his name hadn't been flagged since. But what pulled her in wasn't the file. It was the note she found in an incident report from the hospice facility on Sycamore Hill. Patient, Eugene Voss. Age, 66. Admitted for terminal cancer care. Status, hospice-bound, unresponsive episodes. Notes, subject mutters frequently. References a girl. Said once. She's still here. I kept her. God told me to. Lena stopped cold. She pulled up the interview from 1981 and compared the handwriting. It was Wynn's signature on the bottom of the page. She called him immediately. He answered on the second ring. I always knew it was him, he said. I just couldn't touch him. The next morning, Lena drove out to the facility. She wore plain clothes and carried only the thinnest file. She requested visitor access under the pretense of police follow-up on a historical inquiry. The nurse on shift led her to room 9. Eugene Voss was smaller than his record photo. His face had hollowed in the cheeks. His eyes were clouded. His hands trembled on top of the sheets. He didn't react when Lena entered. He was humming something low and tuneless, his lips barely moving. Mr. Voss, she said gently. No response. She set the photo down on the table beside his bed. Sharon's school portrait, the same one Patricia had kept in her kitchen. Eugene's eyes drifted down. His pupils sharpened. I know her, he said softly. Lena leaned in. How do you know her, Eugene? He blinked slowly. She said she was scared. I told her not to be. Where is she now? He smiled faintly. She's here. God told me I could keep her. Lena stared at him. What do you mean, keep her? He didn't answer. Just stared at the photo like it was glowing. Later that day, Lena drove to Patricia's house. She sat across from her in the living room that hadn't changed in 3 decades. The sketchbook was still on the coffee table. The framed photo still in the kitchen. The cupcake candle from that year was still in the freezer, saved out of habit. Patricia listened as Lena explained. Every word was slow, careful. She didn't react at first. Then she asked one question. Is he still alive? Lena nodded. Patricia stood up. Then I want to see him before he isn't. That night, Lena called the facility to make arrangements. Voss was still muttering when the nurse entered his room. But he'd stopped humming. He was staring at the ceiling now, whispering something over and over. Communion. Communion. Like scripture. Like the Last Supper. He didn't know it yet, but the last voice he'd hear wouldn't be God's. It would be Patricia's. The room smelled like rubbing alcohol and boiled sheets. There was no sound except the mechanical hum of a wall-mounted air conditioner and the faint creak of leather as Patricia Brooks sat down. She didn't want to be there. She didn't want to see the man who had stolen her daughter. But she needed to ask. Not to heal. She would never heal. She needed to break the silence that had been choking her for 28 years. Eugene Voss looked smaller than she expected. Pale. Shrinking into the thin mattress like a dying ghost. His eyes were cloudy, but they focused on her slowly. He blinked, then smiled, the corners of his mouth twitching. I know who you are, he said, his voice hoarse. Patricia stared at him. Good. Then you know what I came to hear. He looked away. She reached into her bag and pulled out Sharon's Sunday dress. The one she used to wear to church on Easter, the one Patricia had folded and refolded 100 times over the years. She laid it across her lap and waited. Eugene's lips moved. She leaned closer. She was sweet, he whispered. She didn't scream. She just looked at me like she was waiting. Patricia flinched. Her hands clenched the fabric. Where did you take her? Eugene closed his eyes. Behind the school. I waited. I knew her path. I knew when the bell rang. I told her God wanted to meet her. And she believed you? Patricia asked. He nodded. She said, Does he know my drawings? I told her yes. She smiled. Tears slipped from Patricia's eyes, but her voice stayed firm. What did you do to her? Eugene opened his mouth, closed it, then finally, I brought her home. I gave her a blanket. I read her from the Bible. She asked when she could go home. I told her God said she was too good for this world. Patricia stood up. She walked toward the bed slowly. Say it, she said. Say what you did. Eugene's voice cracked. God told me if I wanted to keep her close, I had to take her in. He said if I loved her, I shouldn't let the worms have her. His lips trembled. I ate her. Slow. Like communion. Like scripture. That way, she'd never leave. Patricia's body jolted as if struck. The dress fell from her lap and crumpled to the floor. She leaned against the wall, trying not to scream. Eugene was weeping now. I kept her warm. I kept her whole. She's still with me. Patricia turned back to him. Her voice was quiet and sharp as glass. You don't get peace. You don't get heaven. You get to die with her name in your mouth and rot under your sins. She walked out without picking up the dress. Lena Price was waiting in the hallway. She opened her mouth to speak, but Patricia raised a hand. Take me to the house, she said. Now. Voss had given them directions during questioning. It was a single wide trailer tucked behind a curtain of overgrown pine and kudzu, just off Sycamore Hill. The place hadn't been touched in years. A padlock hung crookedly on the door. Forensics had already started their slow work, but Lena had pulled strings. Patricia was allowed one supervised walkthrough. She stepped through the front door. The living room smelled of rot and mildew. A sagging couch sat beneath a broken window. On the far wall, a calendar still hung, stuck on May 1981. She moved down the hallway, past a door that led to a room with peeling wallpaper and a child's shoe tucked in the corner. Her knees buckled. Lena caught her elbow. They reached the kitchen. The floor had been ripped up, exposing a trapdoor beneath. It was open now. Patricia stared into the dark cavity. Inside was a chest freezer. Police had found it duct taped shut beneath 2 inches of dust and plywood. They had already opened it. Inside there was no body, but there was Sharon's necklace, the one Patricia had given her for her 10th birthday. Her name was etched on the tiny heart pendant in cursive. There was a bundle of hair wrapped in an old dish towel, and at the very bottom, there was a sketchbook, slightly water damaged, but still intact. Patricia didn't touch it. She couldn't. A technician placed the sketchbook in an evidence bag and handed it to Lena. She would bring it to the station for analysis. Patricia just stood there, staring into the hollow. Lena finally spoke. We'll scan every page. Patricia whispered, you won't have to. I already know what's in it. That night, Eugene Voss died in his sleep. Alone. He left no written confession, no apology, but what he left behind was worse. In the corner of the kitchen closet, behind a loose panel, officers later found a second freezer, empty but stained on the inside. The edge was lined with jagged tooth marks, child-sized, uneven, some fresh, some older. They would never find the rest of Sharon. And for Patricia Brooks, there was no justice. Only the memory of a daughter who walked home in the sunshine, carrying a sketchbook, and never made it to the porch. The police scanner buzzed softly in the evidence room of Dale County Sheriff's Office. Detective Lena Price sat at the long metal table under flickering fluorescent lights, turning the pages of Sharon Brooks' sketchbook. She wore gloves, but it still felt like a violation, opening a child's private world 28 years too late. The first drawings were exactly what they'd expected. Pencils dulled from use. Lines etched with care. Sharon had drawn a picture of her house, with a front porch and 2 flower pots. Her mother was smiling from the steps, her arms wide open. There was a second drawing of a rabbit, lopsided but sweet. A tree, a lake, the sky. Then came the shift. The page after that showed a room, cramped and square, with no windows. Just shadows in every corner. A figure stood in the center. He had no face, only a white circle where his head should be. The caption in Sharon's handwriting read, "He told me God talks to him through the walls." Page after page, the drawings grew darker. One showed a bed with ropes tied to each corner. Another, a dinner plate with something unrecognizable on it. Then one that made Lena sit back in her chair. It was a church altar, crudely drawn, but with one detail precise. Sharon herself, curled up on the altar, her eyes wide with fear. Above her, stick figures of angels hung upside down, mouths open. At the bottom of the page, she had written, He said, "I'm the offering." Lena closed the sketchbook gently. She pressed her palms to her eyes. She had handled cold cases before, had seen things that turned stomachs. But this was different. This wasn't evidence. It was a child begging to be found. She called Patricia. "Are you sure?" Patricia asked, her voice sharp but steady. "I think you should see it," Lena replied. "There's more than drawings. There's her voice in there." Patricia arrived an hour later. She wore the same dress she'd worn the night before at the hospice, now wrinkled and damp from Georgia humidity. She didn't speak as Lena walked her to the table. Lena handed her the sketchbook, page by page. At first, Patricia's lips curled upward. She saw Sharon's picture of their house, a little drawing of herself labeled Mommy, arms reaching out. She held it against her chest briefly. Then her hands began to shake. "She drew all this?" Patricia whispered. "Yes," Lena said quietly. When she reached the altar drawing, Patricia stopped. Her thumb brushed the paper like she was wiping Sharon's hair from her face. "He made her think God hated her," Patricia said softly. "He twisted her whole world." The next page was worse. It showed a narrow box underground. Sharon was drawn inside, knees to her chest, eyes closed. Around the box were black swirls, looping in on themselves like smoke. The caption said, "Don't open me. He's not done yet." Patricia dropped the book. She walked to the window of the evidence room, staring out at the rows of patrol cars and yellowing grass. Her breath fogged the glass. "I need to see him again," she said finally. Lena turned. "He's gone. Passed this morning." Patricia didn't react. "I need to say what I should have said 28 years ago. I need him to hear me, even if it's just the walls listening." Lena didn't argue. Back home, Patricia took Sharon's Sunday dress from the bag. She pressed it flat with her palms, then folded it once, then again. She placed it in a small suitcase alongside the sketchbook and Sharon's old bunny toy. She had kept it all this time. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because if she let go of it, then it would be real. That her daughter wasn't just missing, she was gone. The next day, she returned to Voss's trailer alone. The police had finished their sweep, but the place still stank of death and mildew. Patricia walked through it like a museum. The walls were yellow-stained. The bed was covered in old sheets and cigarette burns. She opened every cabinet, every drawer, looking for something, anything. She found a Bible on the nightstand. Inside, there was a passage highlighted. "If thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell." Beneath it, Voss had written in small, shaky pen, "She was the eye. I took her so I wouldn't fall." Patricia tore the page out, crumpled it in her fist, and set it on fire with her lighter. She dropped it into the bathroom sink and watched it curl into ash. When she returned home, she took Sharon's sketchbook and flipped to the first page. It was a drawing of Sharon under a tree, smiling wide. Her eyes were big and round. The sun was shining in the corner. Patricia framed it. That night, for the first time in 28 years, she opened the window in Sharon's room and let the summer air roll in. It smelled of honeysuckle and cut grass. She lay down, the sketchbook beside her. In her dream, Sharon was walking up the porch steps barefoot, her arms wide open. And this time, Patricia opened the door. Patricia Brooks sat across from Detective Lena Price, her hands folded over her lap like she was holding something invisible. She was quiet for a long time. "You're sure he's gone?" she finally asked. "Yeah," Lena said. "Confirmed this morning. Cardiac arrest." Patricia nodded. "Good." But there was no peace in her voice. No relief. Just space. The kind of empty space left behind when someone gets away with something you can never undo. "I still need to talk to him," she said. Lena tilted her head. "You mean?" Patricia looked her square in the eyes. "His body's still at the county morgue, isn't it?" Lena didn't answer right away. Her silence was permission. By the next afternoon, Patricia stood in the viewing room of Dale County Coroner's office, staring at the cold metal drawer marked Voss, Eugene. The air smelled like bleach and regret. A young assistant named Tasha wheeled in the gurney and gently unzipped the bag. He looked smaller than the monster Patricia had carried in her memory for 28 years. His skin was pale gray, lips slightly parted. The waxy stillness of death made him look almost plastic. Unthreatening. Insignificant. But Patricia didn't flinch. She pulled Sharon's Sunday dress from the plastic bag she brought. It was neatly folded, the same one Sharon wore to Easter service in 1981. The one with the small yellow flower embroidered on the collar. She laid it across his chest. "You remember this?" she said, her voice steady but low. "She wore it the week before you took her." Tasha hesitated by the door, unsure if she should stay. "You can wait outside," Patricia told her. Alone now, she stepped closer. "You know what I regret?" she asked the corpse. "I regret that you died before I could watch your face shrivel behind bars. Before I could see your hands cuffed so tight they turned purple." She leaned over, her voice sharp now. "You confessed, not because you were sorry, but because you were dying and wanted someone to remember you. You thought giving her back to me, piece by piece, would make you important." She paced to the foot of the gurney. "You stole my baby. You ruined every birthday, every holiday. You made me live in that house alone with her laughter stuck in the walls." Her voice cracked now. Her shoulders shook. Did she cry? Did she scream when you locked the door? No answer. Did she beg? Or did you just shut her up so you wouldn't have to feel anything? Still silence. Patricia pulled something else from her bag. The framed sketch from Sharon's notebook, the one of her smiling under a tree. She used to draw onto the window. Every Sunday. Just sit there, sketching the garden. She loved the dogwood tree. She placed the frame next to him. "She still shines brighter than anything you ever touched." Then she reached in her coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. "For the record," she whispered, "this isn't forgiveness." She slipped it into the body bag's chest pocket. "It's the last letter I ever wrote to her, and you're going to take it with you. So when the worms get to you, maybe they'll choke on it." She stepped back. For a moment, Patricia did nothing but stare. Her hands were clenched into fists, her breath shallow. Then, slowly, she relaxed her fingers and walked toward the door. Halfway out, she stopped. "You don't get peace. You don't get heaven." She looked back once more. "You get a rot, while I live." And she left. Later that week, the county held a press conference. It was brief and clinical. Sheriff's officials confirmed that Eugene Voss had confessed on record to the murder of Sharon Denise Brooks. The evidence, sketchbook, necklace, DNA on the preserved braid of hair, was enough to close the case officially. There would be no trial, no sentence, just a sealed file and a grieving mother with no one left to punish. Patricia did not attend. She stayed home, tending to her overgrown backyard. She clipped the rose bushes, cut the dead branches from the dogwood. She sat on the porch and wrote in her notebook, same as always. Her neighbors had watched her for years like she was a ghost. Now, they greeted her again, some with pity, some with shame. But Patricia ignored them. Their guilt was not her burden. That evening, as the sky dimmed, Lena pulled up in her unmarked cruiser. She carried a box labeled Final Returns, Evidence Release. Inside was Sharon's sketchbook, the framed drawing, and the bunny toy Patricia had kept since 1981. "You sure you want this stuff back?" Lena asked softly. Patricia looked into the box. "Yes." She took it inside and placed it all in a drawer beneath the kitchen sink. Out of sight, but not forgotten. That night, Patricia did not sleep. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind. She thought of the sound of Sharon's feet on the porch, of laughter bouncing off the living room walls, of braiding her daughter's hair on Saturday nights. She had survived something unthinkable, but the story wasn't over. The world knew now, not just what happened, but how it was ignored. Patricia promised herself one thing. She would spend the rest of her days making sure no other child disappeared without noise. No other mother was told to wait until morning. And no monster like Eugene Voss got to rot quietly. The day after the press conference, Patricia Brooks opened the box from Detective Lena Price again. She had kept it shut for a week, but something pulled her back to it. Some strange, unfinished chord in her spirit that wouldn't let her rest. The sketchbook was on top, resting against Sharon's childhood necklace and the evidence bag with the frayed braid of her hair. Patricia ran her fingers along the sketchbook's worn cardboard edge. It smelled like dust and old crayons. She opened it slowly. Page by page, She moved through her daughter's drawings, soft outlines of animals, sunlit meadows, the dogwood tree behind their house. Then came the shift. The later pages, drawn in a different hand. Sharper, nervous lines. No more color. Just dark pencil strokes, heavy and frantic. The man with no face. The girl in a corner. The words. He talks to God. I think God hates me. Patricia stopped there. She had seen this page before. It was the one shown in court, the one Detective Price held up when they closed the case. But something was different now. A loose page was tucked behind it. One she had never seen before. It must have been missed during the initial review, or maybe stuck to another with time and age. The edge was torn, as if yanked from the back of the book. It had no drawing on the front. Just one sentence in her daughter's handwriting. Don't open me. He's not done yet. Patricia sat back. A tremor passed through her chest. Her hand went to her mouth. Then she flipped the page over. A drawing. The final one. Sharon, curled in a tight fetal position inside a dark box, eyes open. No speech bubble. No smile. Just small scratches around her. Tiny claw marks, suggesting movement. A scribbled shape above her looked like a ceiling or a lid. And in one corner, Eugene Voss's outline stood watch, eyes wide, mouth grinning. Beneath it, scrawled in the margin. I heard him praying. He said the meat needs to be warm. Patricia dropped the sketchbook and backed away from the table. She felt it again, that sick, slow rot that had lived in her gut since 1981. There had been more. More than the confession. More than the remains. More than the police could ever prove. She stood alone in her kitchen, the evening sun cutting through the window like a blade. Outside, the wind rattled the porch swing. She hadn't touched it since Sharon disappeared. But tonight, it swayed like someone had just gotten up from it. Patricia sat on the floor. For the first time in weeks, she cried. Not the sharp, breaking sobs from before. These were quieter, thicker, like the grief had weight now of final form. There was no comfort in knowing the truth. Only the ache of every moment Sharon suffered, now crystal clear. Later that night, Lena Price called. There's something I forgot to mention, she said. The confession, it wasn't just about Sharon. Patricia's stomach clenched. What do you mean? We think there might have been another girl. Maybe more. In another county. Same timeline, same method. But the file was buried. Voss mentioned others during one of the hospice interviews. Patricia stared at the wall. He said Sharon was the only one he kept, Lena added softly. Patricia didn't respond. Her jaw locked shut. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, Patricia walked to the backyard. The garden was blooming, wild and uneven. She looked at the dogwood tree. It had grown taller in Sharon's absence. Its branches reached higher, casting long shadows across the grass. She brought out a chair and sat beneath it. She held the framed sketch of Sharon. The first one, the one drawn before everything changed. Her daughter, smiling beneath this very tree. Patricia kissed the glass, then closed her eyes. And for a moment, she imagined Sharon sitting next to her again. Barefoot, knees dusty, sketchbook in her lap. You kept drawing, Patricia whispered, even when you were scared. She nodded, wiping her tears. You didn't go silent. You told your story the only way you could. That night, she lit a fire in the metal barrel near the fence. One by one, she fed every page of the sketchbook into the flames, except the first. She watched them curl and turn to ash. She wanted the final images, the box, the monster, the words, to burn away. She didn't need to carry that anymore. Let the state file its reports. Let the media replay the headlines. She was done with them all. A few weeks later, Patricia stood before a crowd of mothers at a vigil in Atlanta. Women whose children had vanished. Some had no photos. Some had no names. But they all stood together. Patricia held Sharon's framed sketch in the air. She drew herself smiling, Patricia told the crowd. She drew light, even when the world turned to darkness. That's how I remember her. She placed the frame on a small altar, surrounded by candles and teddy bears. Then she turned to face the cameras. This world didn't protect her, she said, but I will protect her story. And as the sun dipped low behind the skyline, Patricia Brooks stood tall, no longer just a grieving mother, but a keeper of memory, a voice for the voiceless. And in her chest, finally, a flicker of peace.